Hello and welcome to Apti Plus Academy for Civil Services, your one-stop solution for your dream career, WBCS and UPSC. Today, I'm going to discuss one of the most important topic for your civil services, that is fundamental rights. As we all know that this has been one of the most important topics all throughout your preparation days, years, as well as the questions, right? So even if you look into 2022 mains, almost 30 questions either directly or indirectly has come from this section. So as you all know, this chapter becomes so important from your exam perspective. Okay, that's why I have chosen this topic as your discussion. Fine. So let's start with the topic fundamental rights. Okay, fundamental rights. This topic is covered, but this is under part 3 of the Indian Constitution. Part 3. And the articles that are covered under this is from articles 12 to 35. Fine. So this is one of the important point to be noted, part 3. And the articles that are being covered under this fundamental right is 12 to 35. Even this is a question which has been asked in 2022 mains, that fundamental rights covers from articles, okay? There were options like 12 to 35, 14 to 32, like this type of, okay? But the total articles that are covered under part 3 is 12 to 35, right? So before starting fundamental rights, let us have some basic idea about what are rights and what is the requirement of the rights, right? So the first question to be posed in front of us is, what are rights? Okay, what are rights and why this rights is so important? Why the rights are important? Fine. So if I need to answer the first question, what are rights? Okay, so rights are nothing but you can say that rights are some claims, okay, reasonable claims, okay, claims by whom? Claims by the individual, right? So सिर्फ reasonable claims होने से नहीं होगा, it must be supported by the society or accepted by the society. Okay, and definitely सिर्फ क्लेम करने से नहीं होगा, सिर्फ सोसाइटी के एक्सेप्टेंस से नहीं होगा. The third component of rights is that it must be backed by law, backed or protected by law. Okay, so rights are what? Rights are reasonable claims, okay, claims that are approved or supported by the society. Fine. And those are backed by the law also, then we can call it as a right. Fine. Now why this right, these rights are so important? Reason is that rights are, you have to look into the availability of the rights, for whom, against whom. Okay, so if the third question is asked, rights are for whom? Okay, we can say it as individuals. Okay, even some corporations are also included in it. We will come to it later on. That's a bigger part of the discussions. Okay, so as of now we are focusing only on the basic part. Okay, so rights are for the individuals, against whom? Okay, इसका आंसर दो होगा. One is against the state, the other one is against the private individuals also. Okay, so what is the importance of rights? Because as we all know that if we need to live in a society, we have to maintain some of our rights so that we can move, we can prosper, we can excel with full individuality, full development. Okay, and we can achieve our full potential. Fine. So in a state or in a society, when we are having a multiple religious people over here, multi cultural people over here, So we must have some basic rights, okay, so that one's right cannot be infringed by other persons. Fine. So the first thing is that state is the first person, state is the first against whom the rights are available. Why so? Because state is somebody which has been created. State is created, okay, created for what? To protect life, to protect property. Okay, these are the two basic functions of the state. This is the primary reason why a state has been created, right? So when a state has been created, we can also say that state has been created who is empowered to make laws. Okay, laws for whom? For the people residing in India. So when we have surrendered our power to the state to make laws, we can also expect at the same time that when a power is vested on any organization or any body, there is a chance of misuse of that power. Fine. So just to check the misuse of power of state, or we can say to limit undue encroachment of the state in our lives, rights has been guaranteed to us. Okay, the most important reason behind giving the rights is that, look, we have created the state. The state is created with the coming of the constitution, with the commencement of the constitution. So once the state is created, now state के पास बहुत कुछ power है. State का तो primary task is to protect the life, the liberty, to property, to protect the property also. But at the same time, state is also empowered to make laws. Reason, when there is a constitution, the reason behind having a constitution is that the organs have been created and the powers has been divided among them, right? So the state has been created to protect life, to protect property, to make rules and regulations, laws for us. Now, a body or the state for that matter, if it has been created, there is a possibility that it can misuse its power. So just to check the misuse of the power of the state or to limit the undue encroachment of the state in our lives, rights have been guaranteed to us. Fine. So from this we can say that if this is the state and this is the individual, we can easily say that this being the fundamental rights is acting as a shield. Okay, the fundamental rights is acting as a shield against the undue encroachment of the state, or for that matter against the invasive nature of the state. Okay, invasive nature of the state. Okay, now just to protect the individuals, to protect their life, to protect their liberty, to protect their freedom, we are having fundamental rights, and this has been guaranteed by our Indian constitution. Okay, it is not the Indian constitution only. Most of the constitutions, rather almost all of the constitutions of the whole world, have a list of rights. Fine. And these rights is actually guaranteed by the constitution. For whom? For the individuals. Against whom? Against the state. So is it only against the state? Can the private individuals also violate any other rights? Yes, of course. If we look into Article 17, untouchability okay, even if we look into Article 15 clause 2, it has been directed that it is not only the state but also the private individuals who cannot discriminate against the fellow citizens on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex and place of birth, which means that there is always a possibility of your rights being violated not only by the state but also by the private individuals. Fine. So rights are nothing but a protection, a shield against whom? Against the invasive nature of the state, the monster called state. Okay, and as well, and also for the private individuals, because there is always a possibility of your fundamental rights being violated by the private individuals also. Clear? Now, this invasive nature of the state, it is one of the most important thing why the rights has been given, and that is why एक point याद रखना पड़ेगा कि constitution limits the government. Okay, limits the government. The government is created by the people's mandate. We vote the political party to power. Once they are into power, they can do anything they like because they have got the people's mandate. But it's not that easy because there is a written constitution in India, and this written constitution actually limits the government. That means, can we say that the government is limited by the constitution as well as government is also limited by the presence of fundamental rights? Limited by the presence of fundamental rights, because whenever a state is going to make a law, it always has to look into the position of the fundamental rights, because as per Article 13 clause 2, it has been clearly said that once the constitution comes to force, the state cannot make any laws which violates the fundamental rights. So that means it's very much clear or evident from the fact that a written constitution or a constitution limits the government in multiple ways. Okay, one of the tools through which the constitution limits the government is giving us the fundamental rights, which means your fundamental rights are safe in the hands of judiciary and it has been guaranteed by the constitution, right? This is the primary reason for having a fundamental rights. Okay, and these are more important, or these are fundamental because these fundamental rights are provided for the betterment or to achieve the full potential of an individual, so that there is no sort of restrictions, okay, no unnecessary restrictions from the part of the state to grow oneself, but to help you to grow into a full individual. Okay, so does that mean that our rights are absolute? Rights are absolute, yes or no? Okay, the answer is a big no. Okay, because our rights are qualified in nature. That means rights can never be absolute in nature. Rights are always qualified in nature, which means that each and every right, almost each and every right, has got some sort of restrictions. The best being the example of Article 19 clause 1A, freedom of speech and expression. Okay, under this freedom of speech and expression, we have actually 8 restrictions. Okay, under this freedom of speech and expression, we have 8 restrictions like public order, morality, then we can say incitement to an offense, sovereignty and integrity of India. Okay, so likewise, there are many restrictions for the religious freedom also. There are restrictions associated with the religious rituals also. Okay, so rights can never be absolute in nature. Just rights are absolute, rights cannot be absolute in nature. It also clearly justifies that your enjoyment of rights must not hamper the rights of other people also. Okay, so there must be a balance between you enjoying your rights and some other person also enjoying their rights. Fine. And these are protected by whom? Protected by the constitution itself. Okay, now a simple question can be asked, who can put restrictions? This is a question which has been asked in 2023 prelims also. Who can put restrictions in FR? Okay, so there are few restrictions which are already given by the constitution itself. Okay, और उसके साथ भी parliament has the power to put restrictions. Parliament has the power to put restrictions. Like if you see Article 19(1)(a) has got 8 restrictions, out of which initially there were 4 restrictions, but later on Parliament through 2 subsequent amendments added 4 more restrictions to it. Okay, so rights cannot be absolute in nature. They are restrictive in nature or they are qualified in nature. And who can put restrictions on them? The first restrictions otherwise has been put up by the constitution itself, and Parliament is also empowered to put restrictions on the fundamental rights. Now, a big question comes. Fundamental rights are for whom? For whom? Is it only for the citizens or the foreigners or both? Okay, The answer is both. Fundamental rights are not only for the citizens, they are also for the foreigners. Okay, but you have to remember one thing: there are 5 fundamental rights which are specifically secured or enjoyed only by the citizens, like Article 15, 16, 19, 29, and 30. These fundamental rights are only to be enjoyed by the citizens. Here, the foreigners cannot seek enjoyment of these fundamental rights. Fine. So, as till now, what we have learned that rights are against whom? Rights are against both the state as well as the private individuals, right? So, what is the need of the rights? Rights are required for the growth of oneself with full potential. Okay, rights are required to survive in a humanitarian way. Okay, to survive in a full-fledged, you can say, equal to enjoy your life to the fullest extent, to have a growth to the fullest extent. Okay, and state is restricted from entering into your personal domain. Fine. So from this, can we come to a conclusion that rights establish doctrine of limited government, which means the government is limited, as we have already studied. Okay, the government is limited by the constitution as well as by the presence of the fundamental rights. So we can clearly say that fundamental rights establishes the doctrine of limited government. Fine. And these rights are available to both the citizens as well as the foreigners. Fine. Can we say that okay, most of the fundamental rights are negative in character. Negative in character means these are negatively worded. These are nothing but the negative obligations. Ye yaad rakhna. Okay, they put negative obligations on the part of state. State, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. That means it has got a negative obligations on the part of the state. That's why we are calling it most of the rights are negative in character. Fine. और इसके साथ एक भी पॉइंट और एक पॉइंट याद रखना पड़ेगा, not all rights are self executory in nature, which means fundamental rights, not all fundamental rights are self-executory in nature, which means that fundamental rights cannot work by themselves. Okay, not all. I'm not talking about the everybody. Okay, but each and every right. Not all fundamental rights are self-executory in nature, which means a separate legislation is also required to make it a working one. Just for example, we can say Article 17. Article 17 only talks about abolition of untouchability. The Constitution has not said anything about abolition of untouchability. Constitution has just said that untouchability should be abolished, which means that there is no, you can say, no law has been made, or Constitution has not given any sort of, you can say, directions. Okay, that means a separate legislation is required to make Article 17 into force, or to move Article 17, or to make it a practical concept. A separate legislation is also required, and this legislation should be passed by Parliament. ये भी एक क्वेश्चन पूछा गया था तुम लोगों का मेंस पे. Okay, 2022 मेंस पे. Okay, that means fundamental rights, maybe it's seemingly, apparently it seems that the rights are they are self-executory in nature, but there are rights which are not self-executory in nature. Another example you can see it, abolition of child labor. Okay, then prevention of trafficking, then you can say right against exploitation. So ওখানে যেটা actually বলেছে যে Constitution has said, has directed these things. Okay, but কিভাবে করবে সেটা কিন্তু Constitution বলে দেয়নি. So naturally, those are to be implemented, or those are to be, you can say, to let them work, it requires a separate legislation. So we can clearly say that not all are self-executory in nature. Fine. Next, another feature of fundamental right. These are nothing but we are going through the basic features of the fundamental rights so that you will be able to understand what is the requirement of the fundamental rights, or for that matter, the rest of the fundamental rights will be an easy one to understand if you go through the features properly. Fine. Next, can we say that fundamental rights are fundamental for development, or we can say these are basic rights. एक पॉइंट याद रखना, एक क्वेश्चन पूछा जाता है कि which among the following is fundamental in the governance of a country. Okay, so for the governance of a country, it's not the fundamental rights. For that, there is DPSP. Fundamental rights for the development, basic development of one's individual. এই বেসিক রাইটস গুলো আমাদেরকে দিতেই হবে, না হলে কিন্তু টু দ্য ফুলেস্ট এক্সটেন্ট কোনো হিউম্যান বিং প্রসপার করতে পারবে না, এক্সেল করতে পারবে না লাইফে। সো দে আর ফান্ডামেন্টাল ফর ডেভেলপমেন্ট, নট ফান্ডামেন্টাল ফর দ্য governance of a country. Fine. Acha, can we say that rights are an assurance against state? Okay, state here I'm talking about mainly the government. That means whoever comes to the power, whoever is holding the majority in the lower house or the Lok Sabha, whoever is forming the government, doesn't matter whether it's a coalition government or a full government having absolute majority, it does not ensure, a government with full or absolute majority does not assure that they can make anything and everything, or they can take away their rights. But to a certain extent, we can say that rights can be amended, okay, modified, even repealed also. So here comes a big question. In the previous slide, we have seen that rights are doing what? Rights are limiting the government. Okay, the presence of the fundamental rights are limiting the government, but at the same time we are saying कि rights can be amended, modified and repealed also. तो अगर repeal किया जा सकता है तो fundamental rights को repeal तो कर ही सकता है कोई, any government if having माने the government in power can repeal the fundamental rights, then what is then why we are calling it that it actually limits the government? Okay, the reason is that ये rights को amend करने के लिए constitutional amendment की जरूरत है. Constitutional amendment is required under Article 368 is required. Okay, that means fundamental rights can be amended, but not by simple majority. It must be amended by special majority under Article 368. As we all know that there are two types of majority mentioned in Article 368. One is special majority, the other one is special majority plus half of the ratification of the states. Fine. So any federal principle of the Indian Constitution, if it is being amended, it requires the half of the ratification of the states also. That means Parliament cannot do it by itself only. But the fundamental rights can be amended only by special majority mentioned in Article 368. Fine. This is the first thing which you must remember. Another thing is that those rights which form the basic structure of the Constitution can't be repealed. Okay, that means maybe the fundamental rights can be repealed, modified, but those rights which form the basic structure of the Constitution cannot be repealed. Okay, and who is going to decide what forms the basic structure? As we all know, that is the Supreme Court. And Supreme Court developed the doctrine of basic structure in the Keshavananda Bharati case 1973. Fine. So with this, we are ending this class about fundamental rights or the feature of fundamental rights. Next day, we will come to the categories of fundamental rights and we will look into the rights itself. Okay. Thank you.